Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode of the now double award winning Compliance Into the Weeds, awarded a W3 award for the best co host in business today. How about that?
Tom, I did not know that. For all listeners, that is breaking news to me too, and that is delightful to hear. Thank you very much.
So, but as always, my award winning co host, Matt Kelly. Welcome back, Matt.
Always good to be here.
Matt, you wrote about a case that's certainly been in the public news for some time. It seemed to me to be a line of events that have been overtaking us, and that was Cracker Barrel and chatbots. How did chatbots come to impact Cracker Barrel?
So, yeah, this was a fascinating article in the Wall Street Journal looking at the logo controversy. And listeners might remember what that controversy was. It happened in mid-August, where Cracker Barrel's new CEO, she's been there for, I think, 6 or 9 months now, who had been charged with trying to revitalize the brand, which has not been doing well on its same-store sales and overall growth lately. They rolled out a new logo. And that logo was panned because it had the reputation, the accusation was that this logo was very antiseptic, and it dropped the old logo of the ninth since the 70s, I think it was, that featured Uncle Herschel, who is this folksy type of guy. I think he's in overalls or whatnot, but he'd been in the Cracker Barrel logo that we've all seen as we're driving along in the highway somewhere and you pull off for some mashed potatoes and grits and green beans and fried chicken to goose up your cholesterol. But the logo comes out. The logo is panned online, and to such a fierce extent that ultimately they dropped the logo change. Now, what the Wall Street Journal examined was that a considerable portion of those online cries and demands to drop the logo, that this was Cracker Barrel being woke, this was Cracker Barrel abandoning its Americana roots and all that usual stuff you would hear. All of that chatter, or a significant part of that chatter, came from online bot networks that don't actually exist. Like the people that you see allegedly on Twitter talking about how terrible this thing is, they're not real people. The tweets they're saying are not real tweets. Nobody ever said this. These are just automated bot networks generating content and passing it back and forth to turn up the noise, because that is how they get paid under Twitter's economic system. We can talk about how that works momentarily. But Tom, I thought it was fascinating because this was really a bunch of automated bot networks overrunning the company's strategic plans, ripping apart its corporate reputation, and I would say by extension, its corporate culture, and causing this huge crisis and strategic retreat from management, all of it caused by things that don't actually exist and are not real people. And there is no way that that doesn't affect your corporate culture, your internal morale, how employees view the company. And I think compliance officers should pay attention to this, because this came out of nowhere, and it could come for you too, for some other thing that the bots out there decide we're going to target your company and take you down for fun and profit.
Let me pick up on a phrase you used there at the very end, when the bots decide. I had thought that this was human actors who were engaging bots to multiply, go forth, and conquer. Are you suggesting the bots thought this up on their own based upon some algorithm?
It's a little bit of both. And so let me explain how this works. So there are verified users on Twitter, and you are a verified user on Twitter because you pay Twitter to say you are now verified. And you have your little blue logo. It used to be that some employee at Twitter actually confirmed, are you, online person, associated with a real human being? That's gone away. Now you just buy online verification status. So verified users that have these minimum requirements for followers and impressions, if they hit those targets, they can then get paid based on the likes and replies and shares their posts generate from other verified users. So we have bots that pretend to be humans, and they can use help to meet those minimum requirements. So it's bots generating content that gets passed around to other bots generating content that gets passed around to other bots. Is somebody somewhere Behind all this, yes, somebody has to create those artificial bots. Who are those people? We don't know. Are they hackers and criminal gangs? Probably. Are they state actors like Russia or China or North Korea? Probably. Are they legitimate, actual human beings who have an axe to grind politically and they want to try to amplify their voice? Some of that is true too. But basically, if somebody mobilizes a bot network to start passing content back and forth among each other, you will ultimately get paid for that. So there's a whole economic system here that exists that can be exploited by bot networks to amplify the noise around an issue. Sometimes that noise is started by people, actual people, who have a legitimate point of view they want to convey. Some of it is probably caused by criminal gangs who couldn't care less what the conversation is about, so long as it's hitting those requirements and they're getting paid. And some of it is probably caused by adversarial actors out there who are not interested in supporting Western values. Read Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, Pyongyang. They are out there trying to undermine Western values by tearing the West apart. And there is this economic system in place that lets them do that by bot. So what the issue is, I don't think the bots care. Are they politically left? Are they politically right? I don't think the bots or the state actors or the criminal gangs or ne'er-do-wells behind this, I don't think they care either. But they wind up engaging with real people like employees. They engage with real brands they're targeting, such as Cracker Barrel. And it becomes a mess. And there is no way, once this mess ensnares your company, there's no way to respond to it, or there's no way that it won't wind up affecting your corporate culture and what stakeholders think of you.
So this is a little bit different than the doxing you talked about in the context of Charlie Kirk's assassination in the last episode of Everything Compliance, because there's a true financial incentive here for the bots to be bots.
I would say this is more a version 2.0 of that. So there are people out there who are doxing others out there, or they suspected others out there, but you're a right-wing activist, you are outraged, somebody said something nasty about Charlie Kirk, and you dox him or her, and you include that person's employer and maybe the corporate offices of that employer, and then you tweet out to the world, let's all call the company until they fire that person who said this nasty thing about Charlie Kirk. I'll put aside the entire question of do they have the right person or not, and quite often they don't. But the right-wing activists have put this out there. The bots could then seize on that conversation and start building it up and fomenting more and more discontent. Some of the discontent that they fulminate is, I guess, caused by other bots. Some of it is other people on Twitter who see the bot-created content. They get outraged, but we wind up with this roiling, boiling outrage at whatever that the bots are amplifying. And sometimes it could be about demanding that your company take a certain action against a person, firing an employee because maybe they said something that is politically out of step with the right wing and they don't like it. Sometimes it could be about a strategic decision, such as a logo. Sometimes it could be something else, such as suspending your late night talk show host because he said something not nice that the president didn't like, and so on and so forth. We take these legitimate political disagreements that might in a other world without social media and without the bot magnification issue, these controversies might boil over and fizzle away after a few days, but the bots now amplify this because they have a financial incentive to do so. And the money goes back to whoever put these bots into practice, and we don't know who that is. And then you wind up as a company, like you have to do something about it. You have to respond somehow. Doesn't matter if it's fair. Doesn't matter if it's unexpected. Doesn't matter if it's not based in reality. Doesn't matter if it's being driven by things that aren't actually human beings and voices that don't tie back to an actual person speaking the words. What are you going to do if you're that company? And that's the position that Cracker Barrel found itself in, and other companies found themselves in with the Charlie Kirk doxing. And we will see this again and again for other reasons with other companies, because there is a financial incentive, thanks to the bots, to keep on doing this very stupid and pernicious stuff.
Well, Matt, we've had a long history of companies who've made marketing or rebranding missteps. No one on this podcast is old enough to remember the Edsel, but I bet we both remember New Coke,
Hmm.
which was a disaster. Except when Coke switched back, sales of classic Coke skyrocketed. So perhaps it was all a ploy, but New Coke was certainly viewed as a disaster and the public spoke. How is this if a certain segment of the population wants to keep the Cracker Barrel logo and they're vociferous and vocal about it? Shouldn't they be listened to by Cracker Barrel?
Yes, they should. However, we are talking about voices that aren't the public. We are not talking about voices that have a view. We are talking about bots. They're never going to go to Cracker Barrel because they don't exist. They don't eat food. And they are fomenting and agitating the public, not because these bots do or don't like the AI, the new Cracker Barrel logo. They're fomenting the public because the fomenting makes money for the people who created the bots in the first place. They could just as well have said that the Cracker Barrel logo doesn't go further enough. They should change the colors and, keep on leaning on Cracker Barrel until it changed the colors from that brown and yellow to, I don't know, green and purple. They don't care what the issue is because they are not humans. They only care that agitation happens. And suddenly we are divorcing stakeholder opinion from reality. The public had absolutely the right to say that New Coke tasted terrible. And I was around for New Coke. It did taste terrible. But this would be the equivalent of a whole bunch of, I don't know, photocopiers printing off letters all on their own that say New Coke is terrible. And the CEO says, well, millions and millions of people think Coke is terrible. Maybe it was only a tiny handful with a whole bunch of artificial letters. That would have been the New Coke version of what we are seeing here. We are seeing these bots that put out very compelling, very realistic looking opinion, but it's not an opinion because the bots don't have an opinion. They are not real. And yet, by stimulating and agitating other online discussion, you are forcing companies into this defensive crouch and to make decisions and take actions they would not perhaps otherwise have taken. How are we supposed to deal with that as ethics, compliance, legal, and finance and audit executives? And that's the challenge in front of us.
Well, having identified the challenge, what are some of the things we could suggest a company think about doing?
Well, some of it could be forensic. For example, there are services out there that monitor online chatter to try and figure out how much of that chatter is from real people and how much of it is from bot networks that are doing this for fun and profit. In the Cracker Barrel example, they estimated that at the peak, which was late into the day on August 20th, the day after the Cracker Barrel logo was unveiled, at that time, about 70% of every single tweet about the new logo was probably from a bot. That was 400 posts a minute on Twitter just before midnight at the end of August 20th, according to the people out there who track this stuff. 400 posts a minute about the Cracker Barrel logo, 70% of it seemed to come from bots. Over the bigger picture, over several days before Cracker Barrel did scrap its new logo, they figure that roughly half of the calls to drop the new logo came from bots. So should they have done that? Should they not have done that? It's not my place to say, but they should have known that most of, or half of, at that point, half of the calls to drop the logo were not legitimate, I would say. So you have forensic tools out there you could use to try and observe that. You could also, for if your employee is getting doxxed and the noise around that is reaching crescendo levels, you could probably use other forensic tools to figure out this online profile that people say is associated with my employee. Is that actually from my employee? Maybe they have a different Facebook or Twitter profile. And what you're looking at, what the online bots are cranking up, isn't related to your employee. You could figure that out. I would maybe even encourage you should figure that out, because if you fire an employee based on erroneous information and noise that was amplified by online bots, and you have all that wrong, that employee is going to come at you with the wrongful termination lawsuit, and you're going to wind up getting bad headlines. So what are the tools you could use to try to navigate this online noise? We could think about that. Beyond that, I do think that there's a bigger strategic point here about communicating from the start early and often to all your stakeholders about who this company is, what you believe in, what you are or aren't about as a corporation. Try and communicate what your big plans are early and often so that you can try and intercept these bots before they derail whatever conversation or plans you want to have. Perhaps if the Cracker Barrel CEO had said early on, we're going to have a new logo, don't know what it's going to look like. Why don't we have a open, I don't know, crowdsourced discussion about that? Maybe this could have been prevented because everybody would have seen it coming a mile away. I'm not sure. That's more for marketing people to decide. But a lot of this, a lot of the online chatter that gets so divisive, driven by bots or not, is people saying, they're questioning why you're doing something. And if people are questioning why you're doing something, they are essentially wondering, what is your company about? You said you were about this, but really you're doing that. There's a dissonance there. Why are you doing that company? That's the thing compliance and ethics and marketing and legal people need to think about a lot, is how do you prevent people from misinterpreting, misconstruing, or just flat out lying about who you are and having others online believe it? That's the sort of thing that you're going to need to think about.
Could that be in the context of a crisis management preparedness plan, which would incorporate the values of your company as a part of a communication strategy?
Absolutely, it should be. But I get it that a lot of listeners might think I'm ethics and compliance. Crisis communication is somebody else's job, and it probably is, like the marketing or PR person's job. They can come up with the plan. You could consult about the plan. You could advise them on what parts of that plan should include, such as investigation protocols and post-investigation communication of the results of the probe, so everybody is on board with what you're going to say. When you say, we did investigate, we found that this is not true, so we're not taking any action. The online bots are still going to attack that too, but you need to have a plan for all of that. I think, but more than that, you could think about the ethics and compliance people. How will we communicate what our corporate culture and our ethical priorities are? Easy example of how this could all go wrong is if you hire a woman or minority CEO or senior executive, online bots might say, that's a DEI hire. What are you thinking? And then they're going to start feeding it. And then the right wingers will jump in and they're feeding into the noise too. And suddenly your company is being accused of hiring a CEO because they're a woman or a Black or a Latino or something like that, and not because the board thought this is the best CEO. You should be crystal clear in your ethics, then your ethical statements and your culture and how you portray yourself, that those aren't necessarily important criteria. You hire a CEO because you believe that CEO is the best. Whatever their race or gender or ideology or religion should be is coincidental. They had the best plan. They had the best strategy and the best experience. Make sure that people can see that, so that when the online bots start saying that was just a DEI hire, people would say that's just not true. Employees would say that's not been my experience. And, business partners would not be afraid to still do business with you. You need to think that through. Now, I picked DEI because that is a prime sort of issue, politically divisive, that right wingers will pick up on and automated bots will amplify. But there's all sorts of issues that might come forward as being ripe for exploitation by online bots. And you should be thinking about, how do we avoid that? How do we portray who we are and what we value so clearly that when these bots make some cockamamie claim, nobody's going to believe it? That's easier said than done. I appreciate that. But this is a problem that's not going to go away because there's an economic incentive for the bots to do this. So we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it somehow.
Years ago, you presciently said that social media doesn't create new information. It simply amplifies what you input. And if I've correctly stated what you said way back when, it seems to me that this is a prime example of this, and companies need to consider double, triple, and exponential amplification on typically or unfortunately many issues going forward.
I think the exact way I said it was, social media risk is not really a new risk unto itself as much as it magnifies existing risks you already have. People misconstruing your company and what they stand for, that's not a new risk. Companies have had to deal with that risk for decades and decades. However, social media now amplifies their ability to misconstrue who you are and what you stand for. You are going to have to figure out how to deal with that. It's not fair. Frankly, I think a lot of this could be resolved if Elon Musk just turned off this economic incentive. I don't think he's going to do that. But, even if Twitter did, there are still plenty of other social media networks where this will go on. And until we figure out some way to assign accountability for what people say on social media, spoiler, we're not going to. This is going to have to be a very unfair but unavoidable fact of life and corporate risk management that companies will have to deal with.
Well, Matt, that seems like a great way to end this episode of the 2025 award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.